In our last video, I introduced you to a DataFrame validation library called Patito. And at the risk of being monotonous, I'd like to actually revisit the topic. This time we're going to utilize a library called DataFramely. And now DataFramely is a relatively new library with its first release in April of this year. And this library is purely dedicated to Polar's DataFrame validation. And I have to say that after using DataFramely, I like it way better than Patito. So when recording the last video, I actually had a few criticisms about Patito that I edited out. And in hindsight, I wish I would have kept those in because it would have kind of helped provide a backdrop and help tee us up for why DataFramely is much better. Nonetheless, we'll dive into usage and point out some of DataFramely's more desirable features. Okay, so before we go on, I do want to encourage you to go and get the Jupyter notebooks, and you can follow along. You can find that here at the Polar's Code Academy repo on GitHub. We'll have a link to that in the chat, or excuse me, we'll have a link to that in the description below. And basically, all you have to do is come here, and I've given instructions for how you can clone this to your machine. And we do frequently add new notebooks to this repository that correspond with videos that we've done on here. So I highly recommend you go check that out. You can get all those notebooks, and then you can kind of follow along with all these videos that we've been doing. Okay, so first things first, with any new library, you need to install the library, obviously. In this case, we're just going to do a simple pip install. I know there's lots of ways to install different packages these days. You got UV and pip3 and all these, so many different ways that you can do it. We're just going to do the good old-fashioned pip install DataFramely. And so I'm not going to do that here because I've already installed the library. So we can kind of jump right into building our model here. Now, what we're going to do here is import DataFramely as dy. And now this is how the developers have kind of said they want to do it, right? Like I would think that would make more sense, dfly. But I get for brevity putting dy for DataFramely. So anyway, small thing there, but however you want to import the package, we're going to need to do that here. And then we're going to actually use this dy.schema to create a new request class that is a DataFramely model. Now, once you've kind of set up your class and invoked dy.schema here, you can then go about and, similar to how we did model building in Patito, we need to just go ahead and define all of the columns that are going to be in our data. Now I've done that here, so we've got the request ID, request door, and all the rest of those there. Now, DataFramely supports a number of data types, and in this case, the data types correspond with Polar's, right? So it's basically providing us with validation for all of the data, all of the Polar's data types that are out there. Okay, so if you hover over these, you can kind of see more advanced functionalities in here that we haven't leveraged. Here on this integer data type, we basically just want to create this as the primary key. There's really nothing fancy here. But I would recommend hovering over these so you can see a little bit more what's in them, and you can kind of change and maybe play around with some of those there. So once again, we're just defining the primary key here. For the most part, on all of these fields, we just want to make sure that there's no nulls. I guess in the description on this one, we did say that we could have nulls there. But for the rest of them, we don't want to have that, right? Now, the other cool thing with string values is you can actually use a regular expression to check the data that's in that column, right? So in this case, what we've done is we've created a regular expression. And I know a lot of people don't enjoy using regular expressions, but they do a good job of validating data, especially textual data. So we've created one that will look for anything that says add or edit or update or delete, right? So as we're going through, if our data matches those, it's going to be like, yeah, you're good to go. That's valid, right? But if not, it's going to throw an error, and we'll see that in just a minute. But the last one here is the date. And so once again, I would just recommend hovering over this and kind of seeing what other options you have. But again, we're just mostly using some basic basic model building techniques here. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. And I do want to point out just really quickly, this is where I had a lot of criticism for Patito that I ultimately didn't include in the last video. But if you recall, the model building experience was a bit more clunky. You basically had to build a Pydantic model and then retrofit it with Polar's accepted data types. And you can contrast that with this very clean model building experience where we just said, yeah, we want dy.date, and we could easily tell what specific data type we wanted in there. So again, my biggest call out here for DataFramely is that, hey, it's nice and clean and it's much more organized. All right, speaking of being organized, we've structured all of our content into playlists here on YouTube. I do this to help our viewers get a somewhat more cohesive view of the functionalities within Polars. While this helps our viewers learn more about certain topics, some of you may be looking for a more comprehensive learning experience. And that's why I'm recommending you check out my Data Analysis with Polars course. This course goes through numerous functions that are organized into clean and well thought out sections. All of this in an effort to create a chaos-free learning experience. Polars Code Academy listeners can get an additional 20% off when you use code PCA20 at checkout. Simply follow the link in the video description and start accelerating your career today. Okay, scrolling down, we now need some data to validate our model against, right? So we're going to use the exact same data that we used in our last video on Patito. We're this request form data here. And nothing is too special about this. We're just doing a basic read CSV function here. I will call out that we are using the try parse dates parameter, which will, if we don't do that, then we're going to run into a bunch of data type issues because it'll read it in as a string, right? So that does need to be there, but otherwise it's a very simple import here. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay. And so we get 500 records. You can see here we've got 5 columns of data. And now we can go ahead and validate it against that model that we created. So it's very simple to do and very, kind of similar to how Patito did it. We're going to say request.validate. Then we're going to pass in our data frame here. And let's go ahead and just run this now. All right, now in this particular case, we did not raise errors, which unfortunately means that our data is not entirely clean. And I can hear audible groans from all the data engineers out there. I feel your pain. I've had this happen myself where, the data is just not quite right? Like that is a very common thing to have happen. Now, this is another point where DataFramely shines, is here in the validation results phase. And, with Patito, the only option was to go back and fix the data. And, I want to be clear that that's not a bad option, right? Like, in fact, that's probably the preferred option, is to go back and actually fix what's wrong with it, right? But the one thing that Patito did not have was the ability to identify what records actually had problems. So yeah, you could validate the model and you could say, yeah, I see that there's problems, but I don't know where it is, right? And so if you get a data set that has tens of thousands of records, if you're using Patito, that's going to be very hard to identify where the problems lie, and you won't really know what to do from there other than just try to manually check it, or you could do some sort of maybe custom function to scan that. But we can actually do a lot of really good stuff here with DataFramely. We can actually separate the successful records from the failed records, and we can kind of go from there. So in order to do that, we're actually going to come down here into this next cell, and we'll use the filter function off of our model. So we're going to say request.filter, and then we'll pass in our data frame here, and we are actually going to get 2 different objects from this function right here. So we need to pass in 2 variables to capture those. The first variable is going to be a data frame with the number of with the records that were successful, right? So it's going to filter out all the ones that were broken and give us a nice clean data set that, if we wanted to, we could push that forward and push it through the pipeline. The other object here is it's going to be a failure info object. Now, within the failure info object, we do have the ability to actually get the data frame with all the records that were problematic. So you can kind of get both here. And I'm just noticing here as I'm hovering over this, so just kind of just quick point out here, you can see if you hover over the variable, it'll tell us what it's going to return if we get this function. And you can see here it says data frame, which is what I mentioned before, and then the failure info object. So anyway, let's go ahead and run this code so you can kind of see what that looks like. Okay, so we've successfully run that. Got our data frame with successes. You can see that we have 2 records that were missing, right? Because we had problems with 2 of them. And so instead of 500 records, we've got 498. And now if I come down here to the failures, I can then call the invalid method, and that's going to pull a list of all of the, or excuse me, pull the data frame with all of the records that were invalid. Let's go ahead and run that. And you can see that we've got our records that were problematic. Now, why were they problematic? Well, if you remember, if we go back up here, we have this regular expression that checks the request type. And we basically only want these values to be in our final data. And if you look at this, oops, scrolled a little bit too far there. If you look at this, you can see that we have edits and deleted, right? So these do not match with what we are wanting in our data. So we could easily, fix those and put them back into the data set, or we could go back to the underlying data now that we know that the request IDs, the things that we need to fix, and then we could move along with our data pipeline. All right, so just to wrap up here, DataFramely is an incredible new data validation library for pullers. We kept our examples fairly simple, very tame, I would say, but there is so much more that you can do with custom validation rules. We didn't even get into that. You can build really any type of rule that you want, different functions, and make sure that you can check against those. But again, there's so much flexibility here, and more than anything, it just helps you as a data engineer to keep clean data, through your pipeline, and to create checkpoints to make sure that you're getting a good product at the end of the day, good clean data, which especially in the age of AI is very important. So check out the DataFramely documentation, and we'll catch up with you at the next video.